but I want to ask
Hmm.
you this question.
Sure.
You actually know Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Yes.
Back in 2008, y'all worked on a campaign
Hmm.
called Steal Back Your Vote.
Hmm.
You were on his Air America talk show.
Yes.
Both of y'all were talking about if Obama is to win in 2008, that they have to exceed the levels of Republican voter tampering.
Hmm.
You know this guy.
Yeah.
That was back in 2008, nearly 20 years ago. What the hell do you think of him now?
Well, there are two things. Just so you know, Bobby Kennedy was, and I have to say, unfortunately, was a very good friend of mine. He was my co-author at Rolling Stone. In fact, we put out a comic book, which you can also download for nothing, called Steal Back Your Vote, on the issues of vote suppression. He was very progressive. He was like his dad, Bobby Sr., a great hero for America and the civil rights movement. And two things happened to him. One, he literally had a worm in his brain, literally a physical worm that was eating into his brain. And that it's got to affect you. The other, though, is that, and this is a tragic thing, his wife committed suicide. And I can tell you that from that moment on, something was really wrong with him. And it got so bad that he couldn't focus. He was forgetting things that he had spent hours on. There's something definitely wrong with his head. And I say this, I'm not obviously I'm not a doctor, but all I can tell you is between the psychological weight of his wife's suicide and the worms and whatever else is going on with him, I don't know, but this is I find it tragic. Unfortunately, he's making it tragic for the rest of us, and that's why
Yeah.
I have gone public saying this guy is not mentally fit for this job, and it's very dangerous. And he's endangering. When he's right now, he's shutting down the teams that we've closed the labs that test infections from around the world. It took a while to get it, but we had to find out that this virus was coming out of Asia, the COVID virus. Imagine if we had no system and we are now basically naked and unprotected. It's pretty darn dangerous. And, but, to have in such a crucial position a guy with mental deterioration. We talked about Joe Biden. That ain't nothing compared to Bobby.
Right. But you know what's confused? I mean, that's heartbreaking that happened to him, and that's
Mm-hmm.
so sad. But how does that transform you into having steal back your vote to aligning with? I mean, people have trauma all the. I mean, they're not as well known as Robert F. Kennedy Jr., but how does that? Is he a grifter? How does that? How do you transmorgify into where he is today, even with his health issues and personal challenges? It's just so strange to me.
Oh, I think that there's a lot of back that now I want to be careful about being a 2 cent psychologist, but remember, he saw his father murdered on television. This is pretty bad. So he's had some knocks that the rest of us haven't had, but nevertheless, and yes, when you use the term grifter, I hate to say it. When I knew Bobby, despite the fact that he was a Kennedy, he really had very little money. He was a professor at Pace Law School. He really didn't have a lot of money at all, very little, in fact. And despite the Kennedy name and Hyannisport, et cetera. But now he's become a multimillionaire. He is joining this grift where he's getting pieces of he gets a percentage that's coming out of lawsuits that are being brought. He said, "Oh, well, I'm not going to collect this money. I'm giving it to my son." Well, excuse me. That's still more than unethical. So, yeah, I think he's become very wealthy in just the last year or so. And yeah, I think it's a grift. I mean, he got the power he wanted, he got the notoriety he wanted. It's shameful and sad.
When election night hits, I don't trust polls. I think polls are tools of misinformation and for pundits to babble about. I think polls are such bullshit. But when election night hits, considering what you know, did you think she's not going to win? The voter suppression has gone so deep, ain't no way. Or did you feel like, okay, this could possibly happen? What were your thoughts, considering what you know, election night 2024?
Yeah, I was quite confident that given that 3.5 million vote suppression edge, that Trump was going to take it, especially with the decline. There's no question that there was a decline in enthusiasm, a plummet in the number of people voting, but also don't forget there was a plummet in the number of votes that were counted. And now, again, I'm not talking about someone going into the machine and playing games with
Right.
the
You're not flipping
computers. None of
switches. You're
that.
not talking
No, no,
about
no,
that.
none of
Yeah.
that stuff. I'm
Folks have been
talking good.
saying that.
I've been talking, this
Yeah.
is good old Jim Crow tactics, like
Right.
challenges to you, or your name is, one of the things we have in America is this ridiculous system of purging voters. No other nation does that,
Right.
where they just start erasing your name from the voter rolls. Overwhelmingly, like Georgia, they purged, they targeted, are you ready? 875,000 people for the purge in 2023, the year before the election. That's like approximately 1 in 7 voters in Georgia lost their right to vote. And I can tell you right now, because we checked, I was down there, overwhelmingly, again, voters of color and young people. In fact, one of the great ironies is that if you go to gregpalast.com, you'll also see some of the stories. There's the state's this professor who's an expert on vote suppression, PhD. Her vote was challenged. This is like the state's voting expert. Her vote was challenged. So you're talking about the state removing hundreds of thousands of people before the election. So you show up and your name's on the voter rolls, and then they give you a provisional ballot. That's what I call placebo ballot, kind of a back of the bus ballot. And so they said, don't worry if your name's not on the rolls. We'll give you this ballot and just fill it out. Well, according to, again, the federal government, the Elections Assistance Commission, 43%, nearly half of the provisional ballots, and there were 2 million provisional ballots cast. So nearly 1 million provisional ballots were thrown basically in the garbage. Now, whose ballots are they? Again, if you're Black, Hispanic, or Asian American, the chance you will be handed a provisional ballot, half of which will be discarded, is 300% higher than if you're white. So if you're Black, Asian American, Hispanic, your chance to be given one of these placebo, think you voted but you haven't ballots is 300% higher than if you're white. So this is Jim Crow cranked up to a high new level. Now, it's been there. It was there in 2020. Stacey Abrams famously challenged the results of her election in 2018 based on the research of my team. I was working with the NAACP, the ACLU, and my good friend, Reverend Jesse Jackson and Rainbow Push. And we took on these issues. We investigated, and there's no question that Stacey Abrams would have won except for these Jim Crow tactics. So this is not new stuff. It's just that they've gone into cyberspace with it. They're literally using AI now to target voters. There's a Cleta Mitchell, who is Donald Trump's, one of his lawyers, who was on those calls, by the way, Cleta Mitchell, to try to pressure the state of Georgia to overturn the vote. And she set up a group called Eagle AI, or Eagle Eye, using artificial intelligence to challenge tens of thousands of voters. For example, they challenged thousands and thousands of voters in Pennsylvania, and which had a lot to do with Harris's apparent loss in Pennsylvania, which would not have happened except for Jim Crow tactics.